Okay, so if we look at our first example, figure 11.2, we have an example from Brahms, and I will post YouTube links to all of these so that you can hear them in context. But if we look, here we have our augmented seventh chord in the wild, B plus 7. You can see this, the raised fifth, the D sharp, and it keeps coming back. So you've got D sharp here, D sharp here, D sharp here. And it usually follows the circle progression. So you can see our 5 resolves to 1. All right? So we've got 5, 4, 2. We switch to E major. We modulate here to 4, then 5, and then finally 1. All right? Again, we have here at in our Chopin Nocturne, we got a Neapolitan 6th right here, right? Notice we're in a lot of sharps. So our lowered 5th is actually written out as a natural 5, indicating that instead of having a sharp, a D sharp, it's going to get lowered to a D natural. So it's not just, let me see if we can get a better view of this. There we go. So it's not just a matter of making it flat, right? And you're not going to see a flat symbol always. If you're in a key with a lot of sharps, your lowered 5th is going to be a natural symbol probably. If you're in a key with a lot of flats and you have a raised 5th, you might see it as a natural symbol and not as a sharp, right? So just keep in mind the context of the key that you're analyzing in, okay? So again, we can see we go from a 1 to 5 to 1 to Neapolitan 6th. We've got our lowered 5th, or lowered 7, 5, right? And then resolves to 1 follows the circle progression. Okay? Now, keep in mind, altered dominants, just like 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths, are often used as secondary dominants. All right? So keep in mind, these may turn up as a secondary dominant. They can hide pretty easily. But they will, secondary dominants that have been altered, resolve in the same manner as their unaltered counterparts. So they're going to resolve in the same manner. So circle progression, usually they're going to show up as a 5, they will go to 1, right? So an example of that, you can see, clear shot, there we go. All right, so here we've got 5, 7 to 5, 5, 7 to 1. This isn't altered, right? So this is how it resolves in our circle progression. So 5, the secondary dominant goes to 5, which then resolves to 1. Same exact thing. Our secondary dominant that's altered with a lowered 5th, right? 5 of 5 with a lowered 5th just goes to 5, 7, exactly like the unaltered one, and then resolves to 1. Okay? So altered dominants, just a little bit of history. Altered dominants, virtually non-existent during the Baroque period. They did begin to appear a little bit in the classical period, but they really didn't show up until the middle of the Romantic period. So fully into the Romantic period, this is when these altered dominants show up. So look at the composers we're studying right now, right? We've got Brahms, we have Hugo Wolf, Liszt, Beethoven. Think about those guys. Those are the ones who do altered dominants a lot, right? We can see in this example, Hugo Wolf, another good example of altered dominants. So here we have our augmented 5th, resolves to 1, and occasionally, even though most of the time you will see altered 5ths in root position, occasionally they can show up in inversions. And they can show up in any inversion they want. So first inversion, second inversion, if it's 7th chord, it can show up in third inversion, right? So keep that in mind. They can show up in non-root position, although most of the time you will see it in root position. Okay? Here in Hugo Wolf, he loves altered dominants, you can see. We've got 3 altered dominants in the row, all resolving to 1. Cool? We also get a lot of altered dominants in jazz, especially during its heydays, during the 30s and 40s. We can see right here. And again, I will post a link. You can see this, 11.6. We have altered secondary dominants. So you've got a diminished, here's our lowered third and lowered fifth. All right? And then here you can see an augmented 7 of 2, resolving to 2. An augmented, or a diminished 7, or diminished 5 is 5, resolving to 5, eventually with a lowered 9th, actually. And then finally we resolve to 1. Now these are some crazy jazz chords we haven't gotten into yet, but we will a little bit later in the semester. So yeah, also a little bit of how to just deal with the voice leading and doubling, which will help you out in 11.3. Let's see if I can get some of this glare out of the way. Just doesn't want to cooperate. This is as good as it's going to get. Okay. So altered dominants require careful treatment with regard to doubling and voice leading. Resolving the altered pitches sometimes results in doublings that differ from unaltered dominants. All right, so you may have to change some things up. Basically, altered tones are almost never doubled. So don't double the altered tones. Double anything else. And again, it's the fifth that's altered, so you wouldn't normally double the fifth anyway. Triads in this category typically double the pitch other than the unaltered pitch. So double the root or double the third, right? Try to avoid doubling the fifth, which is the altered pitch. So basically, normal doubling rules apply. Resolve the altered fifth. If you're resolving your resolution, you're going to resolve the altered fifth in the direction of the alteration. So a raised pitch. So our first two, the augmented 5 and the augmented 7/5, you're going to raise them. They're going to go up. They're going to resolve up. If you have a lowered fifth, so the other 3, the one with the lowered fifth and the lowered third and fifth, they're going to resolve down. Easy peasy. The 7th resolution, in an altered dominance, the 7th chords resolve the 7th factor down 1 scale degree. So the 5, the augmented 7/5 and the augmented, or the lowered 7/5 and the lowered 7/5 and lowered 3, they're all going to resolve the top 7th, not the 5th, which is the altered note, but the 7th is going to resolve down 1 scale degree. Okay? And they are saying this may result in either a doubled third or tripled root in the tonic triad that follows. And that's okay. You can have triples, as long as it's the root or the third. Totally cool. So, altered tones are almost never doubled. And we can see here in 11.7, almost never doubled. Okay? So we've got our augmented 5th, and you can see the note that's doubled is the G. So we double the root, and then of course our raised 5th resolves up, moves up, and then everything else follows good voice leading practice. Okay? Here we have another example where we double the 3rd instead of the root. Okay, so we've got our D sharp, raised, and this is the raised 7th. All right, when we resolve it, we're going to double the 3rd. Again, this D sharp is going to resolve to E, and then we end up with another E, and then we finish out the chord here, okay, with an octave C. So we've got C, E. We're missing the G. That's okay, because we want to follow good voice leading resolutions. Now, here's one where we end up with a tripled root. Right? So here we've got a 5 with a lowered 5th, and here's our lowered 5th, the D flat. Okay, so we've got a G, B, D flat chord, and our lowered 5th resolves down a step to C, all right, and then we end up with C and C. So C, 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 and E, totally fine. Okay? So we just don't have our fifth, which is not a big deal. In our 5-7-5 with a flat, right? Let's find our chord. So we've got G, B, D flat, and here's F. Here's our 7th, right? So our 5th, which is our altered note, is going to resolve down a step, and our 7th is also going to resolve down a step. Perfectly okay. And then we end up with C, G, E, and C. So just the doubled root. So that one worked out well. Here we have a first inversion. So notice that's first inversion, not just root position. 5 with a lowered third, right? So here's our D flat, our lowered third above the bass, right? So we've got B, D flat, G, and a G. Okay, so our altered note is going to resolve down, and everything else follows good voice leading principles. Our G stays, our tenor drops down, and our bass moves up. And then finally, here's our half diminished 7th with a lowered 3rd and 5th. And as you can see, we've got our D flat, F, and G. So G, D flat, F is our chord. And we've got our lowered D flat, lowered B flat, G, B flat, D flat. There we go. Oh, G, B flat, D flat, F. That's what our chord is. So our 3rd and 5th are lowered, and they're both going to resolve down. And then our 7th is also going to resolve down. And even though our bass is also resolving down, which generally good voice leading principles tell us not to do, in this case, because of the altered notes, it's acceptable. Okay?